Feel that. Hear that sound. That incredible precision. That's the kind of rush we chase here on All Sorts Podcast, The Deep Dive. We don't just skim the surface. We're diving deep into the sources you give us, aiming to unlock the secrets of speed, specifically on a racetrack.
And today, we're really focusing in, obsessing almost over the racing line and how you can really understand and conquer the apex.
Exactly. So whether you're deep into sim racing, maybe getting ready for your very first track day, or, maybe you're just fascinated by the physics of it all.
Yeah, understanding the racing line and that crucial point, the apex, it's fundamental, isn't it?
It really is.
And we've gone through some great material, driver61.com, discussions over on RF1 Technical, insights from trackseed.eu, Jonathan Goring, Motorsport.
Lots of good stuff.
Yeah, we've tried to pull it all together to give you some clear, practical takeaways, no jargon, just stuff you can actually use.
Okay, so let's break it down. This racing line, it sounds a bit like a myth sometimes. What exactly are we talking about?
Well, think of it like the most efficient path through any given corner, the fastest arc you can possibly trace.
Okay.
But it's not like painted on the track, right? It changes. It depends on how sharp the corner is, what comes after it, like a long straight, and even the car you're driving. The main goal, the only goal really, is to carry the absolute maximum speed all the way through, from braking to getting back on the gas.
So it's not just about, keeping the car pointed forward. I remember reading Jonathan Goring Motorsports saying something like, the more you turn the wheel, the more you slow down.
That's a huge part of it, absolutely. Minimizing steering is key. It shows you're on a good line. But the racing line itself, it's more like a sequence, a series of critical points.
Okay, like what?
Driver61 lays it out nicely. You've got your braking point obvious enough where you start slowing down.
Right.
Then the turning point, that's where you actually commit, start turning the wheel for the corner.
Right.
Then the apex, which we'll definitely get into more.
It's a magic point.
Kind of, yeah. And finally, the exit point where you're straightening the wheel out and getting ready to accelerate hard.
The apex. You see drivers aiming for it, clipping it. What is that exact point?
So the apex, sometimes called the clipping point, it's that instant, that precise moment where your car is closest to the inside edge of the corner, usually the curb. Track.eu mentions this too. It's almost always on the inside. Think of it as the innermost point of your curve through the corner.
Okay.
And here's a crucial thing, something Driver61 and sim racers stress, vision. You need to be looking at the apex way before you even think about turning in.
Look where you want to go. Classic advice.
It really is. Your eyes guide the car. If you're looking at the apex early, you're much more likely to turn in correctly and hit it.
Makes sense. Now, Driver61 also brought up this geometric line. Is that the same thing, just a different name?
Not quite, no. The geometric line is more of a theoretical concept, but a useful one. It's the path with the shallowest possible curve, using the absolute full width of the track-wide entry, middle apex, wide exit. Its main value is showing the basic physics. The tighter you make a corner by turning the wheel more, the slower you have to go. The geometric line makes the corner radius as large as possible using the track width.
Right, so it maximizes the radius. Wouldn't that be the fastest way then? Just keep a constant speed?
You'd think so, but here's the catch. Racetracks aren't just single corners in isolation, are they?
No, there's usually a straight bit next.
Exactly, and that straight is key. The geometric line isn't usually fastest overall because it doesn't prioritize getting onto that straight as quickly as possible. That's where the ideal racing line comes in. It's a modification. You typically turn in a bit later and aim for an apex that's also a bit later than the geometric line's midpoint apex.
Later turn in, later apex.
Why?
What does that do?
It changes the whole exit phase. By apexing later, even though your turn into the apex might be slightly tighter, it allows you to straighten the car much earlier as you come out of the corner. You get a much straighter shot onto the following straight.
So you sacrifice a tiny bit in the corner to get a better launch out of it.
Precisely. That's the trade-off. A straighter exit means you can apply full throttle sooner and hold it for longer down that straight. That's usually where you make up way more time than you might lose with the slightly lower minimum speed mid-corner.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
Driver61 really emphasizes this. Later braking is possible. You spend less time turning, and you just open up that exit for much better acceleration. The geometric line might feel smoother, but the ideal line is usually faster lap time-wise because of that exit speed advantage.
This apex thing really seems central to everything.
Yeah.
Trackseed.eu mentioned different types, single, double, even triple apexes. What's going on there?
Yeah, the shape of the corner itself dictates the best strategy. For most standard corners, say under about 120 degrees.
Okay.
A single apex is the way to go. It might be right in the middle, or you might deliberately aim for a late apex, like we just discussed, to prioritize the exit. But for really tight turns like hairpins or very long, large radius corners over 120 degrees, sometimes a double apex is faster.
Hitting the inside twice. How does that work?
It sounds weird, but yeah. You get close to the inside curb, drift out slightly, then come back in for a second apex point later in the corner. Trasy.eu uses a good visual. A single apex hairpin looks like a U, but a double apex approach is more like a V.
A V. Okay, I could picture that.
Often in a hairpin, that V shape lets you carry a bit more speed on entry and still get a strong exit. For the big, long corners, a double apex can help break it down and maintain momentum better than one wide, sweeping arc.
And triple apexes. That sounds wild.
They're rare. Trasy.eu mentions the Galgenkopf corner at the Nürburgring Nordschleife as an example. It just shows how complex corner geometry can get, demanding really specific lines.
Wow. Okay, so how do you decide? Do you just guess?
Well, Trasy.eu suggests two approaches, really. There's the trial and error feel. You drive it, see what feels fastest, what gets you the best result.
The seat of the pants method.
Exactly. Or you study. Watch experienced drivers, look at telemetry if you have it, and understand the principles. Generally, if there's a long straight after the corner, you're probably looking at a late single apex or maybe a double apex to maximize that exit speed.
Makes sense.
But they also point out your car matters. If you've got a car that accelerates like crazy, a double apex might pay off even in corners where it wouldn't for a less powerful car. It's all interconnected.
Okay, now this next bit from Driver 61, it really made me think. The ideal acceleration point. They argue strongly it's almost always at the apex, not before. I always kind of assumed you'd want to squeeze the throttle a little earlier if you could.
That's a super common thought. And their fundamentals article explains why that's usually not the fastest way. It boils down to the physics of grip.
Okay.
At the limit, the speed you can carry is directly related to the radius of the turn you're making. It's actually an exponential relationship. To go just a bit faster, you need a significantly larger radius turn.
Right. Bigger curve, more speed potential.
Precisely. So if you start accelerating before you reach the apex, what are you doing? You're demanding more grip for acceleration while you're still turning towards the apex. To make the corner and still hit that apex, you inevitably have to tighten your steering radius earlier than you otherwise would. You're forcing the car into a tighter turn because you've added the demand of acceleration.
So jumping the gun on the throttle actually makes the corner tighter and therefore slower overall. That feels backwards.
It does feel counterintuitive, yeah. Driver 61 calls it creating a false apex. You're sort of optimizing for an imaginary point before the real geometric sweet spot. You might feel faster accelerating early, and maybe at one specific point on the following straight, your speed is momentarily higher.
Right.
But crucially, at that same time, the car that waited to accelerate properly at the ideal apex will likely be further down the track already, because they carried a higher minimum speed through the most critical part of the corner.
The minimum speed, that's the key.
That's the key. By waiting until the apex, you allow yourself to use the widest possible radius right at the slowest point of the corner. Maximizing that minimum radius allows the highest possible minimum speed. The penalty for reducing that minimum speed by accelerating early almost always outweighs any tiny gain you get further down the straight.
Yay, that clicks now. Maximize the radius around the true apex to keep the minimum speed high.
You got it. The apex is generally your gateway to starting serious acceleration because it marks the point where you can begin opening the steering and using the grip for going forward, not just turning.
Is there ever a time to accelerate early then?
The one main exception Driver 61 points out is qualifying, specifically the very last corner before the start-finish line.
For the run to the line itself.
Exactly. In that single instance, sacrificing a tiny bit of apex speed to get the absolute maximum possible speed across the timing line to start your hot lap can be beneficial. But for race pace, for consistent laps, accelerating at or just fractionally after the apex is generally the winning strategy.
So this ideal line, the perfect apex,
yeah,
it's not the same for every corner, is it? It must change.
Oh, absolutely. It has to adapt. Driver 61 highlights this well. In faster flowing corners where you really want to keep your momentum up, your ideal line will look much more like that smooth, wide geometric line. You're minimizing scrubbing speed.
Makes sense.
But in slow, tight corners, like hairpins, the ideal line deviates much more. You'll see that much later apex to really, really prioritize getting power down early for the straight that follows. Exit speed is king there.
And what about things like chicanes, those quick left-right flicks?
Yeah, Tracid.eu had a good point there. You can often think of a chicane not as two separate corners, but as one complex corner requiring a sort of double apex technique. You compromise the first part slightly to set yourself up perfectly for the second part, and the exit. It's all about linking them smoothly.
It all sounds incredibly precise. I saw some discussion on RF1 Technical about whether you could just, mathematically calculate the perfect line. Is there like a formula?
If only it were that simple. The short answer, echoed by pretty much everyone in that discussion, is not really. Not a simple formula anyway.
Why not? Physics is math.
It is, but the number of variables is just enormous. Yes, fundamentally, a bigger radius allows more speed. But then you factor in your specific car's braking ability, its cornering grip limits, how it puts power down, the exact bumps and cambers of the track surface, tire wear, fuel load. It gets incredibly complex, incredibly fast.
So way too many things changing all the time.
Exactly. Real-world racing teams use incredibly powerful simulation software, feeding in tons of data to try and find the optimal line for their car on that track on that day. It's not something you can just punch into a calculator.
I see. So it's more about understanding the principles than finding one magic equation.
Pretty much. Someone on Reddit mentioned trying to minimize squared curvature mathematically, but even that has issues, like maybe not hitting the apex quite right in the real world. It shows that while physics gives us the rules, applying them perfectly involves simulation, driver feel, and adapting to the conditions. It's a mix of science and art, really.
Jonathan Goring Motorsports also talked about wide, tight, wide, and just turning the steering wheel less. How does that simple idea fit with all this apex talk?
It fits perfectly. Wide, tight, wide is just a simple way to visualize how you maximize the corner radius. You start wide, aim for that tight apex point near the inside curb, and then naturally unwind the steering, letting the car drift wide on the exit. Doing that creates a much gentler, larger radius arc compared to just cutting across the corner somehow. And Goring's point about steering less, that's the direct result. If you maximize the radius, you don't need to turn the steering wheel as much.
Right, less steering, less speed scrubbed off.
Exactly. He put it brilliantly. Finding the line is just fancy words for learning to turn the steering wheel less. That's the fundamental goal. More steering angle equals slower speed. So wide, tight wide, helps you achieve that minimal steering input for maximum speed.
But he also mentioned sometimes sacrificing radius.
Yeah, that's the nuance again. Sometimes the absolute mathematically widest radius through the corner itself might point you in a slightly awkward direction for the start of the next straight. So you might consciously tighten your line just a tiny bit mid-corner to ensure you get a better launch onto that all-important straight. It's always a balance for the best overall lap time.
Okay, one more scenario. What about when it rains? Track Titan had some warnings about sticking to the normal dry line. Why is that?
Yes, wet weather driving. It flips everything on its head, basically. The biggest reason the dry line is often bad in the wet is because of all the stuff that gets laid down on it during dry running.
Like what?
Rubber particles from the tires, tiny bits of oil, fluids, dust. It all gets ground into that specific strip of tarmac. When it rains, water mixes with this stuff and lifts it to the surface, creating a layer that's surprisingly slippery, much slicker than the surrounding tarmac.
So the grippiest part in the dry becomes the slickest part in the wet. Seriously.
It often does, yeah. It's totally counterintuitive. But Track Titan explains that the parts of the track off the main dry line are often cleaner. They don't have that buildup of rubber and oil.
They might actually have more grip in the wet.
Exactly. Experienced wet weather drivers actively search for these alternative lines. They might drive much wider, take different apex points, brake in completely different places wherever they can find that cleaner, grippier surface. The dry line is often the last place you want to be.
And hydroplaning too, I guess.
That's another huge risk. The dry line often develops slight grooves or depressions from wear, and water naturally pools there. Hit one of those puddles at speed on the slick surface, and you're just aquaplaning. So yeah, rain means you have to forget the dry line and become a grip detective, searching for the best adhesion wherever it might be.
Man, this has been fascinating. We've gone from basic definitions to complex strategies and even wet weather. To sort of wrap it up, what are the absolute core things we should remember about the racing line and apex?
Okay, the fundamentals boil down to this.
Yeah.
It's almost always about maximizing the radius of the corner you're driving through. That's goal number one.
Bigger arc.
Bigger arc, yeah. And understand that critical trade-off between how fast you enter the corner and, more importantly, how fast you exit it onto the next straight.
Exit speed is often king.
Very often. And remember, the apex is usually your key transition point, the place where you can start unwinding the steering and really begin accelerating hard. Vision is paramount. Look ahead to where you want to go, especially that apex. And finally, think like Jonathan Goring said. Try to turn the steering wheel as little as possible. Smooth inputs, large radius. That's the secret sauce.
So for everyone listening, whether you're hitting the sim or the real track, hopefully you've now got a much clearer picture, a better foundation for finding that faster way around.
Definitely. And it makes you think, doesn't it? This whole idea of finding the most efficient path, hitting that critical turning point, the apex of a challenge. Where else can you apply that? Finding the optimal line in other parts of your life to, accelerate towards your goals. It's kind of an interesting thought.
It really is a great thought to leave people with. Now, before you power slide into whatever's next on your agenda, remember the insights we've explored today in this deep dive brought to you by us here at All Sorts Podcast.
Yeah, and if you found this exploration as illuminating as hitting the perfect apex,
then please light up our YouTube channel with a like. Share this deep dive with anyone else who loves speed or just understanding how things work. And definitely subscribe so you don't miss out on our next exploration into the fascinating corners of, all sorts of things.
And remember, just like building speed lap after lap, your learning journey with All Sorts Podcast builds momentum too. We've got a whole back catalog of deep dives already recorded.
That's right. Go check out our previous episodes. There's a ton of knowledge waiting there for you.
The search for that perfect line, it never really stops, does it? Keep following All Sorts Podcast as we explore more curious curves on X, find inspiration on the straights of Instagram, and connect insights over on Threads.
Your engagement, your likes, your shares, they genuinely fuel our journey. So please, join the All Sorts Podcast community. We'd love to have you along for the ride.